Well, hello, Cloud and Bridge kids. So I noticed as I started this video that actually this is the 10th video that I've made for you guys. So it's Cloud and Bridge Tiny Church Kids number 10, which feels like a lot. I don't know if I'm excited that we've made it to 10 or just a little bit sad that we've had 10 weeks away from each other. I guess it's both, right? So welcome to week 10. And we're going to be looking at another story of Jesus's life after his resurrection. And I've always found those stories really interesting because when I was a kid, we talked about Jesus raising from the dead and we talked about Easter and we did all that stuff and we talked about Jesus's miracles, but we didn't talk very much about the period of time after Jesus died. He rose from the dead, boom, done. And so I always found these stories really interesting because I didn't know about most of them until I was actually a grown up. And could read them for myself and read the Bible for myself. So I'm kind of excited to share them with you guys because I just feel like they don't get told enough. So you guys probably already remember from the couple weeks before this that it's a little bit of a confusing time, right? So we have different stories in different gospels. Jesus keeps appearing and then disappearing. And so they see him and he talks to them and then he's gone. And they kind of don't know what to do. And each gospel has a slightly different take on it. They record somewhat different stories, right? Like the story that we read, the Road to Emmaus, is really only told in detail in one gospel and mentioned in another. The Doubting Thomas story is only really told in detail in one gospel, right? They each kind of hit different things that are important about what's going on. So the story that I'm going to tell you today is actually found in the book of John, which is not a gospel that we've talked a whole lot about, right? So there are 4 gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we've done most of our stories from the book of Luke because Luke does a lot of the stories of Jesus's life. When we talked about the miracles and the parables from Jesus, we went all over the gospels. I got those from all over different places, but most of the stories that we've looked at when we've been talking about Jesus's life have just been from Luke. A few as we've gotten to the resurrection from Matthew and Mark. So, but this story is only told in the book of John. And John doesn't have quite as many stories. It has them, but not as many because he really focuses on Jesus's teachings. He talks about what Jesus taught them, right? And he has a lot of Jesus's words. In fact, yesterday when I was scrolling through John, because I couldn't remember exactly where I wanted to be, Eliana was sitting next to me and she goes, Jesus talked so much in this book because it was all in red, right? And everything was in red. She couldn't believe it. So John has a lot of Jesus's teachings, but this story isn't so much about Jesus's teachings. It's about what happened. And it's only found here in John. So I wanted to read it to you. So this is John chapter 21. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, James and John, and 2 of his other disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. And they said to him, we will go with you. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. So we have several of the disciples that we know were part of the 12, right? Thomas, Nathanael, James and John, Simon Peter, and then 2 other disciples that they just call 2 of his other disciples. So 2 other people that probably weren't part of the 12, but were followers of Jesus, right? And we know there's been lots of other people, like those guys on the road to Emmaus that followed Jesus. They just weren't part of the disciples that we like with the big D, right? So, but they're all hanging out together. And I think they're feeling like, what do we do now, right? Jesus keeps appearing to them and he's given them instructions, like we read last week, to go into all the world and preach the gospel. But I think they're still feeling a little like, okay, now what, right? It's just a little confusing. So Peter says, I'm a fisherman, let's go out and catch some fish. So the other guy's like, okay, we'll go with you. So they get in a boat and they go fishing. And even though they're fishermen, they fish all night, they catch nothing. So already this reminds me of another story. And I wonder if it does to you too, because we talked about this and we talked about miracles. So any of you guys who have been at Cloud and Bridge for a long time probably will remember this story that happens in another gospel earlier on. Okay, but John and this story are going to remind us of it a little bit. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. So again, that's a lot like the road to Emmaus and some of the other things. Jesus is enough different that they don't quite recognize him at first till he does something that makes them realize it's him. And Jesus said to them, children, do you have any fish? And they answered him, no. And he said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. So there's this random guy on the shore being like, do you have any fish? And they're thinking maybe he wants to buy some. So they're like, no, sorry, we didn't catch any. And he says, cast it on the right side. And I wonder if this made them think of that story I talked about earlier in the Gospels, right? There's this time very early on, right when Jesus is calling these fishermen to be his disciples, when they're fishing and they don't catch any fish. And Jesus tells them, cast your net on the other side of the boat. And they do. And I don't know if you remember that story, but there's so many fish, the net breaks, right? And we talked about that in our miracles, that Jesus has control over much of the natural world. Either he knew there was fish over there, so he had knowledge, or he told all the fish to go into the net. We don't know, right? But Jesus had control of the natural world. And we talked about that with miracles. So just hearing the stranger tell them, well, just put your net on the other side, I wonder if it made the disciples also think of that moment with Jesus, because they actually obey this guy and they don't yet know that it's Jesus. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish, right? So similar to before. That disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John. He always calls himself that in the book because he's trying to talk about how much God loved him and saved him. So the disciple whom Jesus loved, therefore said to Peter, it is the Lord. So the moment they get all these fish, and there are just so many fish out of nowhere when there hadn't been any more, John knows, okay, that guy over there has to be Jesus, right? He's remembering when Jesus called them and there was just thousands of fish when there had been none before. And it all rings a bell in his mind. He's like, oh my goodness, that is Jesus. That is the Lord. And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he didn't catch on quite at first, but when John tells him, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work. So he had changed his clothes somehow to fish. I don't know, it's dirty work, something. So he puts whatever it was that he took off back on and threw himself into the sea, right? Just like when he tried to walk on water. He like jumps into the water. He's got to get to Jesus, which is so Peter, right? And the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from land, just about 100 yards off. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it and bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish that you have just caught. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Now none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. And Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. So what's interesting to me about this is that it reminds me of so many other things that Jesus did while he was alive. First, we have this miracle that reminds them of when they were called to be Jesus's disciples, right? Of the fish that weren't there, and all of a sudden there's millions of fish. And then he offers to feed them, and he breaks bread and fish, which makes us think of the feast of the 5,000, right? Where he breaks the little loaves of bread and the little fish, and he gives them to everybody, and there's enough for just thousands of people, right? Even though there was only, 2 fish and 5 rolls, right? So that makes me think of that. And even that, like he's feeding them and giving it to them, sounds a little bit like the Lord's Supper. So in all of this, what's the point of this story? Why did Jesus come, feed them breakfast, give them a nice haul of fish that they could go then sell later? Why did he come back to do all that? Well, I don't know for sure, but I think it's to remind them of a lot of things. He's reminding them of all the miracles he did while he was with them, right? So they don't forget. He is raised from the dead, and he reminds them of the types of things that he did, right? How he provided for them and how he took care of things and the control he had over the whole world and all the things that he could do, so they would know. And it helps them because one thing that Jesus said to them when he called them to be disciples, he said, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. I will make you fishers of men, fishers of men. Did I make you sing that song? I probably didn't, and that is such a bad choice on my part. I will teach you that song. Anyway, it's a great song, but the idea of fishers of men is a little weird, right? What he's saying is, I'm going to make you my disciples, and I'm going to have you tell everybody about me. But they don't know that yet right at the beginning, right? But this reminds them. This reminds them of the task that he is giving them, that he has made them fishers of men, not just fishermen, but fishers of men. And he's telling them that you will go out and you will try to catch fish and there will be nothing. But I will bring you plenty of fish. And that's true when we tell people about Jesus, right? We know that it is actually Jesus who changes people's heart and does all those things, not you and me. My only job is just to tell people about the Lord, right? Is to bear witness to what he's done and to say who he is and all the things that we're supposed to do. But I don't have to change people's hearts. That's something that Jesus does. And we'll talk later in Acts about the Holy Spirit and how he comes in and changes people. But it's really helpful to know that I'm not the one providing the fish, right? Jesus is bringing out the fish or all the people that he wants us to tell. And our only job is just to say what God has done, which feels hard, but is actually pretty simple, right? So he shares that with all of them. And he also shares food that he just brought, right? I mean, they got a whole bunch of fish, but Jesus already had fish and stuff waiting for them to eat. And so he's providing for them once again. And he's reminding of them that you're going to go out, you're going to tell people about me, and I will provide. I will take care of you. Don't worry. So it's a very physical reminder as they're trying to figure out what they should do next and who they're supposed to be and what the early church is supposed to look like, that God will take care of them. He will go before them and he will bring them people that he wants in his kingdom, right? So they know all that. So he's kind of reminding them of all the things they went through with him, that they may have forgotten all of the horror of his resurrection and excitement of or horror of his crucifixion and excitement of his resurrection. He's reminding them of those things. And it should remind us too, because we've heard those stories. And it's kind of a cool story to think that Jesus just comes and then when they recognize him, feeds them, right? Once again, the resurrected Jesus is kind of popping in, popping out, but he's trying to give them instructions. He's trying to help them for the next step ahead and let them know that's going to happen. Anyway, I hope you guys have a great week. You're getting close to the end of school, which is exciting, and summer and all of that fun stuff. So since the weather's gorgeous, go outside, enjoy the outside, enjoy something crazy, running around your backyard or something, and have fun. Bye, guys.